They didn't negotiate. They didn't wait. They took the oil, 30 to 50 million barrels, high quality oil, transferred immediately to the United States, not after a treaty, not after an election, but after a military strike, after the capture of a sitting president, after Caracas fell under American control. Donald Trump said it plainly. No ambiguity, no diplomacy. We're going to keep the oil. If that sentence doesn't stop you, it should, because this is not just Venezuela. This is not just Trump. This is a signal that power in our time is no longer subtle. That markets follow force. That morality is negotiated after control. Many believed Iraq was a lesson learned, an error never to be repeated. But Venezuela suggests something else, that the rules were not abandoned, they were rewritten. If you want to understand how power really works today, stay with me, because now we need to understand what this moment truly represents. So what exactly are we looking at? On the surface, this looks like a clean story. A failed state, a captured dictator, sanctioned oil redirected, order restored by force. But that reading is too simple. What's happening in Venezuela is not just regime change. It is a transfer of control, of territory, of infrastructure, of cash flow. The United States is not merely intervening. It is temporarily running Caracas, overseeing oil exports, selling Venezuelan oil at market prices, and deciding where the money goes. That matters. Because oil is not just a commodity. It is leverage. It is diplomacy in liquid form. It shapes alliances, budgets, and borders. Trump himself drew the comparison. Iraq failed, he said, because America didn't keep the oil. This time, he insists it will be different. And that single distinction changes everything. To understand why, we need to go back before the strikes, back before the collapse, back to how Venezuela, once rich beyond imagination, broke itself. Venezuela should have been untouchable. It sits on more than 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, more than any country on earth, nearly 4 times the reserves of the United States. In the late 1990 seconds, the system worked. Production reached 3.5 million barrels a day. Money flowed, the state functioned, then it broke, not because the oil disappeared, but because the institutions did. Mismanagement, corruption, rising extraction costs, and a political system that treated oil as entitlement, not capital. Over time, production collapsed from millions of barrels a day to roughly 800,000. Pipelines rusted, refineries failed, skilled workers left, oil stayed underground, but power evaporated. This is how resource-rich states fall. Not suddenly, but structurally. And when institutions decay faster than resources, something predictable happens. External power steps in, and that is where this story turns from economics into geopolitics. Because Venezuela's collapse did not create a vacuum. It created an invitation. Collapse invites action, but action rarely arrives quietly. It arrived with strikes. The capital was hit, Caracas shook, and within days, Nicolás Maduro was captured. Not removed, not exiled, captured, along with his wife. They were flown to New York to face criminal drug charges. In that moment, the crisis crossed a line. This was no longer pressure, no longer sanctions, no longer diplomacy. It was direct control. Trump made it explicit. The United States would run Caracas until a safe transition could occur. And he added a warning. If needed, there would be a second attack, larger, more decisive. Then came the oil, 30 to 50 million barrels, turned over immediately, loaded onto storage ships, sent directly to American docks. Energy Secretary Chris Wright was ordered to execute the plan at once. No delay, no ambiguity, If you're trying to make sense of this, pause here, because this moment matters. Not just for Venezuela, but for the rules of global power. And to understand why oil sits at the center of all this, we need to look beneath the surface. Because the real story isn't the seizure. It's the system being built underneath it. This is not chaos. It is design. What the United States is building in Venezuela is not a traditional occupation. It is a managed extraction system. Oil is sold at market price. But the proceeds are controlled, not by Caracas. By Washington. Trump says the money will benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States. That sentence is revealing because control over revenue is control over the state, who pays salaries, who repairs infrastructure, who decides priorities. And oil infrastructure is the choke point, pipelines, ports, refineries. Fix those and the state breathes. Control them and the state obeys. This is why US oil giants suddenly matter. Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, they are not invaders. They are stabilizers, capital, technology, execution. Billions of dollars are promised. Broken systems repaired. Production restarted. Not as charity, as investment. This is transactional geopolitics. Power does not occupy ideology. It occupies cash flow. And once you understand that, the next escalation makes sense. Because systems under construction must be defended. And that brings us to the second crisis. Systems invite resistance. And resistance invites escalation. Trump did not soften his language. He hardened it. The United States, he said, was ready. Ready to strike again, harder, larger. Caracas was no longer just occupied. It was warned. This is how control is stabilized. Not through presence alone, but through credibility. The message was simple. Disrupt the system, and the response escalates. At the same time, another process was unfolding, quiet. Boardroom level, America's oil titans were summoned to the White House. High-stakes meetings. Future planning, not about war, about production curves, capital deployment, long-term returns. This is the second crisis most people miss, because violence grabs attention, but investment locks in outcomes. Once billions are committed, the system becomes permanent. Infrastructure ties, policy to profit, security ties, profit to force. At that point, withdrawal becomes costly. Reversal becomes irrational. This is how temporary control turns into structural presence. And while this reshapes geopolitics, its real weight falls somewhere else. On ordinary people, on lives that never appear in press conferences. That's where we need to go next. Now, step away from the map. Think about the person living inside this system. Think about you, because when states collapse and systems are rebuilt, ordinary people carry the cost. If you are Venezuelan, your life has been frozen for years. Inflation, blackouts, empty shelves, a future on pause. Now power shifts overnight. New authorities, new rules, new masters of the economy. Oil flows again, money moves again, but not into your hands. At least, not yet. Decisions are made far from your street. In Washington, in boardrooms, in places you will never enter. And if you are American, this still touches you. Your government now controls foreign oil, foreign revenue, foreign rebuilding. That power can stabilize, or it can corrode. History shows it can do both. So the question is not whether this works economically. It probably will. The question is moral. And moral questions don't disappear with profits. If this matters to you, don't just watch, pay attention. Share this, because these choices shape the world you live in, and they don't stop at borders. What happens in Venezuela does not stay in Venezuela. Because oil is global, prices are global, signals are global. when the United States takes direct control of foreign oil flows. Every major capital notices. Allies reassess assumptions. Rivals recalculate risks. For years, sanctions were the weapon of choice. Slow, legal, indirect. This is different. This is physical control over supply. Energy markets understand one thing clearly. Who controls the tap controls the conversation. For oil-producing states, the message is unsettling. Resources do not guarantee sovereignty. Institutions do. For rivals of the United States, the lesson is sharper. Power is no longer only about influence. It is about enforcement. And for global companies, the signal is practical. Political risk now cuts both ways. Instability can invite punishment, but it can also invite partnership if you are on the right side. This reshapes norms. It blurs the line between intervention and administration, between security policy and business strategy, and once norms shift, they rarely snap back. Which raises the most difficult question of all. What happens next? Because from here, the future does not move in one direction. It branches. From this moment, 3 futures are possible. The first is success. Oil infrastructure is repaired, production rise, revenue stabilizes the state, American companies make money. Venezuela regains basic functionality. In this version, control works, order precedes democracy, and stability justifies the method. The second future is stagnation. Oil flows, but institutions don't heal. Money circulates at the top. The state functions, but the society doesn't. This is managed decline. No collapse, no renewal, just a country permanently administered. The third future is failure. Resistance grows, costs rise, security hardens. What begins as stabilization becomes entrenchment. What was meant to be temporary becomes unsustainable. History is crowded with such stories. Which future emerges depends on one variable. Not oil, not force, not investment. Institutions. Who controls them? Who is accountable? And who benefits when power is finally handed back? This is where the Venezuela story stops being about Venezuela. Because this model, once tested, can travel, and when it does, it will redefine how power is exercised. Which brings us to the final question. What should we take from all this? We're going to keep the oil. That sentence will be remembered. Not because it was shocking, but because it was honest. It revealed a world where power no longer hides behind language, where control is justified by efficiency, where morality follows management. Venezuela did not fall because it lacked resources. It fell because it lost institutions. And the response to that failure tells us something uncomfortable. In today's world, collapse invites administration, not solidarity, not patience. Administration. This may work. It may even succeed. But success comes with a cost. Because once power learns it can take and run, it rarely forgets the lesson. So the real question is not whether Venezuela will recover. It's whether this becomes the new template, a future where stability is purchased, sovereignty is conditional, and oil decides who gets rescued and how. If you want to understand the next phase of global power, this is where it begins. If this analysis gave you clarity, share it. If it unsettled you, that's the point. And if you want to go deeper, stay with me. Because this story isn't over. It's just getting started.